Here we are at the Honda Institute, ready for some top mechanic action. Got my tools, got my gin, so we're ready for anything I think. Let's see if there's MD in. Well, we've come to the Honda Institute, which is a fantastic workshop, and we need a top man to show us all the ins and outs, the insider tricks on how to work on your bike. So I've got with me Steve Frost, who's Honda's press service centre chief technician. He's the man that looks after all the bikes which we destroy essentially when we go out and road test with them. And Steve's going to take us through a few of the sort of basic jobs that he would do on a bike when it comes in for a bit of a service. How would you start looking at a tyre when you sort of got a bike in for a check?
Right, well essentially you need to check tyre pressures when they're cold.
Yep.
And basically you're checking for the condition of the tyre. Now you need to go around the whole circumference, which is why we've jacked it up in order that we can go round it.
Yep.
And you're basically looking for any bad tears or cuts in the tyre, and that's around the whole circumference of the tyre.
Nails, that kind of thing?
Anything that may be in the tyre. I mean, if you get small pieces of flint in the tyre, which is tiny bits that you'll pick up off the road, you'll see them quite clearly in the tyre, and it's a matter of removing them if they've got any, like that. But I mean, it's only tiny, it's not had an effect on the tyre, it's certainly not cut through. And on the whole, that tyre's not bad, but as you can see, if you run your hand along the edge of the tyre is actually quite feathered.
Yeah, you just feel it going down at the edges of the
Yeah,
grooves.
and that's as a result of quite hard braking on the hull that causes that tyre to wear in that type of pattern, but we're nowhere near the wear limits.
Yeah.
That's a good, healthy tyre.
So there's been some bad boys riding this bike, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, journalists alike.
Oh, the swines. Swines. Pressures?
Tyre pressures.
And any sort of tips for checking the pressure, just as you say, a cold tyre?
Absolutely, you must check it on a cold tyre. Obviously the tyre pressure changes once it becomes warm. We use just a conventional tyre inflator, but we also have a very accurate calibrated tyre pressure gauge which we use, which in actual fact it was only certified this week in actual fact. So we know that that's been calibrated, we know that that's accurate, so when we've checked it with that, they're going to be spot on. So quite simply, when you do check your tyre pressures, the best way to do it is just to overinflate the tyre. Now I've already checked what the tyre pressure is and it should be 36.
Okay.
So we'll just overinflate it on this, and it was actually reading 25, so it tells you how much pressure has been lost since it was last checked. So I've inflated that now to 40 psi, so I know that's well over.
Okay.
And you get your accurate pressure gauge. And bearing in mind we want this to be at 36. That's at 50 at the moment, and we just deflate it to our required pressure. There you go, 36 psi on the button.
Perfect.
And then you quite simply put your dust cap back on and make sure that it's tight.
While we've got the front end up, is there anything else you would check here? Bearings or anything like that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whilst you've got it jacked up, it'll obviously be quite simple for you to carry out another few checks. Quite simply, to check your wheel bearings. I mean, there's two ways of doing it. Audibly, you can spin the wheel, and if the bearings are quite bad, you would actually hear them rumbling. But additionally, you're going to be checking to see if there's any movement in the bearing, and that's a matter of moving the wheel from side to side to see if there's any lateral movement in the bearings themselves. If you detect any play in the front wheel bearing at all, then it's time for replacement. And that's nice and solid, nice and firm, and that's absolutely fine.
I'm guessing while we've got the bike up, it's a good time to have a look at the steering head bearings as well.
Yes, I think it probably would be, especially as most of your readers are probably out there doing wheelies all day long and coming down quite hard on the front end.
Hooligans, Steve.
Be a good idea to check the front end.
I try and stop them, but no.
You encourage them positively.
No.
Right, just a quick check on your steering head bearings. What you're looking for is complete freedom of movement from lock to lock without any notchiness or play or binding within the front. If your head bearings are too tight, or that they've actually become worn, where you keep coming down hard on the front, the outer race of the front steering bearing can become dented, and that then causes a bit of a notch on the front and on the steering, and then you would detect it and feel it. Right at the front you'd have a tight spot. This is absolutely fine. This is what you'd be looking for, is nice, smooth, free movement from lock to lock with no play or binding in the middle and no tight spots. So the head bearings on this bike are absolutely fine. If they were worn out, you'd feel a very distinctive tight spot in the middle.
Oh yeah.
And
I've seen people sort of
and if they're
doing
too
this.
loose, that's the final check that you make, is as long as there's no play or binding, you just get the front of the bike and just move the forks laterally backwards and forwards just to see if there's any movement or play there. And again, that's absolutely fine, there is no movement.
Perfect.
So again, that's just a quick check that you can make on your steering bearings. Another small quick check that you can do on the front is just to make sure that your brakes are actually functioning okay. I mean, apart from the visual checks, which you would need to get a torch to actually get in there and have a good look.
Just check the pads, see how much meat's left.
Absolutely. I mean, you can check the outer pad from here, and again, to view the inner one, you can do it just through the wheel inside there, and you can check visually that the pads are still healthy. You'd also do a visual check on your brake hoses to make sure that there's no splits, there's no bulges in the pipes, and if you just compress the front brake lever, you can actually feel the pipe if there was any bulges and any breakage within the pipe work. And so they're okay and they're fine. And just as a quick check for your brake pads as well, if you pump the brake up, you know the brake's locked on. If you release it and the wheel spins very freely, then you know that there's not too much stiction going on in the front brake calipers.
Yeah, if you get some corrosion and stuff.
Absolutely. They start to bind up, and all of that will zap power, and it'll increase your fuel consumption, it'll wear your discs, it'll wear your pads.
Rubbish, bad stuff.
Absolutely.
Don't want that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so continuing the brake inspection, I mean, if you're doing a full job, you want to get the caliper off and have a bit of a dig about, checking the pads and the pistons inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
First things first, get it off.
Yeah, all you need to do is obviously loosen anything off that's is there to retain the brake pads. Just remove the outer, and then there's a central pin which you just need to loosen off. Clearly you wouldn't loosen that if you'd already removed the caliper and you had the caliper in your hand.
Yeah,
so
because
just to loosen anything off like that before you start. And then to remove the caliper, you just simply remove the bolts. Now these bolts are Loctited generally, and it is recommended that they're replaced when they're removed.
Well, with new bolts?
With new bolts.
Okay.
So just as a quick visual check on the condition of the brake pads, you can see there, small mark that you can see in the brake pad is like a depth gauge to tell you about the brake pad and when it's worn out, and when it gets to the bottom of that, it's a true indication that the pads are worn out and are going to need replacing. If you want to go further than that and you actually want to service your brake caliper and clean it all up, and
yeah, that's a bit dirty, isn't it?
It is quite dirty, and the brake dust all builds up. You get a lot of the road dirt that gets into the front, and bearing in mind it is at the front of the bike, a lot of dirt does get trapped in the brake caliper. So to service your caliper, you'd need to remove your brake pads. We've already loosened the pin, so we can just withdraw the pin straight out the caliper now. Comes out like that. Just remove that, and the brake pad slides straight out of your caliper. And quite simply, again, another visual check. You're looking at the brake pad surface to make sure that there's no cracks in the material itself.
Yeah, friction material.
Any chips on the edges where stones or something might have got up in the brake caliper and caused some damage to your pad. And there's no delamination between the brake pad material and the back plate.
There's a bit of dirt and gunge in there.
Yes, absolutely. To actually do a better job of that, I mean, at this stage, to actually service the brake caliper, as you can see, there's an awful lot of brake dust that's built up in there, and the pistons are actually quite dirty. So at this stage, what you'd be doing if you really wanted to service the brake caliper properly is to pump the pistons out, get some brake cleaner, clean up all the pistons.
Just an aerosol spray.
Just an aerosol spray. Clean up all the pistons, make sure there's no dirt on them. Pump the pistons back into the caliper. Obviously, because this is a 4-piston caliper, you're going to need to put something in the top two, just a small piece of wood in there, and then you can pump your lever, you can get your pistons out, free them all off, pump them all back into the caliper. Again, with the brake pads, you do exactly the same. You clean them all off in the brake cleaner, make sure they're all nice and clean, and then you can copper slip the back side of the brake pad and the leading edges here, just to make sure that you don't have any problems with any stickiness in the brake caliper. And so that's a quick check on your brake pads. To service the caliper properly, what we want to do is to actually get the pistons to come out very slightly from their housing in order that we can clean them up. Now, you do need to be careful that you don't pump them out too far, because if you do, you're going to lose all your fluid, and then you're going to be into nightmare scenarios with having to bleed your brakes again. So all you want to do is to pump them out a small amount. Now, we've got 4 pistons in here, so we need to stop 2 of them from coming out in order that we can pump 2 out. So we just put a piece of wood in there just to stop the pistons from coming out of their housing. Now, if you could pump the front brake a little bit, Al, and I'll tell you when to stop. And as you can see, as he's pumping the brake, the pistons are coming out of the caliper. That one's now met the piece of wood, and now the bottom ones are coming out. That's fine now, you can leave it there just for a second. And as you can see from that, just actually spraying it has got rid of most of the dirt and contamination within there. And you just give it a bit of a brush. Turn the caliper over, do the same this side.
Smells like powerful stuff, eh?
It is very powerful stuff. You don't want to be doing that in a closed environment.
I'm feeling better already, Steve.
Right, as you can see now, all the pistons are nice and clean.
You could eat your dinner off those, Steve. Look
almost. You might want to, but I won't. They're clean enough. All the pistons are clean, there's no dirt, no brake dust, no contamination in there whatsoever. Now, when we've done this, what you want to do is just to ensure that the pistons are all moving freely within the caliper, and just gently squeeze them back. And I push that one in now, the other side comes out quite freely. And I push that one in, and that one comes out quite freely. Those two are now nice and free, and I can push them all the way home in order that I can put in the pads back in, a nice easy job. Here we have a fully prepared caliper, and it's all serviced and ready to put the pads back into it now.
I suppose the last thing to check is the brake fluid, eh?
Be a good idea to check that, being as we've checked everything else, wouldn't it?
Yeah. First things first, what are you checking first?
Well, there's a couple of things that you can check. I mean, firstly, you have a sight glass here, which it's quite easy, obviously, for you to be able to check the fluid level.
Yep.
We can see that it's up above the lower level, so we know that the fluid level is okay. As a secondary check, you can also, as you can see, this is quite clear.
Yeah.
The fluid is quite opaque, you can see through it. Now, if you're going to do lots of track days and use the brakes really extensively quite hard, it's recommended that the fluid gets changed every 2 years, 24,000 miles.
That's
in normal service.
In
normal service, that's when you'd recommend changing it. If you guys are going to be doing lots of track days and using your brakes quite hard, the fluid can become contaminated. It can boil, it can absorb moisture, and it can become contaminated. So it'd be a good idea if it becomes cloudy and discoloured, or if you get any softness to the brake feel, it's time to be changing your fluid as well. As you can see, that, I mean, that's a really hard, firm front brake lever. If you had moisture or any air in the system, then you'd have a very poor feel and the lever would come back to the handlebars. So that's just your last check that you want to be doing with regards to your fluid.
Another thing to check at the front end, fork seals, would you have a look at that?
Again, good idea, being as we've checked the head races, bearing in mind that, again, lots of wheelies can cause problems with the fork seals. There's 2 things that can cause problems with the fork seals. Either that the fork stanchions themselves become pitted.
That's the chrome bit.
This is the chrome bit here. It needs to obviously be very smooth, very clean, not be chipped in any way. If you get, you know, you can get some road debris come up and affect your forks. If it gets chipped, what will happen is that you'll get a very rough surface, and that rough surface working up and down within the fork seal will eventually wear a groove in it, and then you'll start to have some fluid coming out of your fork legs, so it can destroy your fork seal. So it's a good idea just to look at your forks to make sure that they are all clean. and that there aren't any stone chips. But secondly, if your fork seals have blown, the chances are that you'll have some residue fluid just starting to seep out from the dust cover there.
Yeah.
And if you've got any remnants of any fluid, then you need to change your fork seals.
Okay. That's a worry for, I mean, if you lose the oil, the suspension's not working as well.
Absolutely.
Plus it's maybe going to get on the brakes and cause a problem there.
If it remains undetected and you don't do these checks, the fluid can seep down your fork leg and onto your brake pads and cause you problems there as well. Absolutely.
Worth maybe paying a bit of attention to the controls on the bike, just to sort of improve the feel and the fit, maybe, you know, like make you feel a bit more at home on the bike.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I mean, it's quite crucial that all of your switchgear and your controls are all nicely lubricated and aren't tight or seizing up. Just a couple of checks. I mean, quite simply, you can see from this that there's too much free play in your clutch lever. Now that's going to have a detrimental effect to how your clutch operates, so it's always best to ensure that you've got all your levers adjusted properly. Again, in your owner's manual, common sense will tell you that you need to have just a small amount of free play, between 10 and 20 millimetres at the end of the lever. So here, you've just got a small amount of free play there, but as long as you've got some free play at this end, then that's fine. And then you can do the lock nut back up. And just as a little tip, try and ensure that you get the cutout to the bottom, just to ensure that no water gets into there.
Obviously cable clutch there, hydraulic clutch, there's nothing to worry about there. Check the level, like
obviously checking your level, but also your pivot points. I mean, again, if you're going to ride your bike through the winter, some of the corrosion can build up in here. It doesn't take 2 minutes to remove your lever. There's just a small nut underneath. Undo your pin, grease it all, put it back, and you'll have such a nicer, smoother operation to your clutch lever, all for the sake of 2 minutes to put a bit of grease in there. Again, with your switches, you can do the same. You can get electrical lubricant, which you can spray into your switches. And again, you know, the salt and the muck that you get on the road, these switches do become a bit tight over time, and just to squirt some lubrication into there will just free up all your switches and just make your controls work that much easier. You want to be doing the same on the throttle side with your switches to make sure that they're lubricated, and obviously more importantly that the lever point and all the pivot points on the front brake lever are nice and lubricated. These can also become, over a period of time, they can dry out, and you can actually dismantle the levers and put lubrication and grease in there, because you want this to be able to be fully adjustable and fully
I've seen them season up before on some bikes.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that makes a big difference to the feel of the bike, as to whether